Welcome to Beyond the Grave, where darkness lurks and the veil between worlds thins. Join us as we delve into chilling tales of restless spirits, haunted places, and the unknown lurking in the shadows. Brace yourself for bone-chilling encounters that will send shivers down your spine. If you dare to venture into the realm of the supernatural, subscribe now and journey with us beyond the grave. Let's begin. They were not so loud, however, that I could not hear my father scream. It was over in a matter of minutes, and the key to my shackles slipped under the door. I rushed over and picked it up with trembling hands, sliding it into the metal cuff around my ankle and turning it. The cuff came loose with a heavy click, and for the first time, I was free. The key to the door slipped under the jamb as well, and I opened the door to the rest of the house. The place had been all but destroyed. There was splintered wood and broken glass everywhere, and in the center of the living room was what remained of my father, a pile of blood-stained feathers. The birds had all flown off, but Mr. Crow sat on top of the living room fireplace, regarding me with a curious look. "Now you can fly free, little girl," he said. "No more cages for you." "Thank you, Mr. Crow," I said. "Will you come with me?" Mr. Crow shook his head. "I am an old bird," he said, "and my journey is coming to a close, but yours is just beginning." Mr. Crow flapped his wings and took flight, and I never saw him again. As I stepped out of the front door, my bare feet touched the grass for the very first time, and I could smell the flowers on the breeze as it drifted over me. At that moment, though my feet were firmly on the ground, my heart was soaring through the endless blue sky, far above the world that I had left behind. I still wake up every morning to hear the birds sing, and when the first few notes break the silence of the early dawn, I think of Mr. Crow and smile. I used to look out the rusted iron bars of my window and dream about being a bird. The chain that shackled me to my bed was just long enough to reach the windowsill, and so every night after my father would visit my room, I would lie awake and wait for the first rays of light to creep over the horizon, then walk over to my window to listen to the morning's first few notes of birdsong. Their melodies were so beautiful that I knew that they must have been singing about places far away and wonderful, about sailing on the wind through endless blue skies, looking down at the treetops that dotted the land below. Then one morning, as I lay in bed, something impossible happened. I had fallen asleep the night before and would have missed my morning bird song, but for a tapping on my window. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and sat up to see a crow sitting outside on the sill, tapping my window with his beak. I crept over to the window and smiled at the bird. "Hello, Mr. Crow," I said. "Hello, little girl," said the crow. I stood there dumbfounded for a moment, not knowing what to say. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I forced myself to speak. "You know how to talk," I said. "All birds know how to talk," he replied. "It's just that not all humans know how to listen." I pushed my window open a crack until it hit against the bars. The bird cocked its head in curiosity. "Why are you in a cage?" it asked. "I think it's my destiny," I said. "It's always been this way." "You look rather thin," replied the crow. "Would you like something to eat?" My stomach gave a weak growl. "Yes," I said. "That would be wonderful." Without another word, the crow took flight. A few minutes later, he returned with a small branch of figs. The crow watched me as I greedily devoured the fruit. After I had finished, he stared at me for a moment before speaking again. "I didn't know they put people in cages," he said. "Do you think they mistook you for a bird?" "I don't think so, Mr. Crow," I said. We whiled away the rest of that day talking. The crow told me all about what it was like to fly and how there was no better feeling in the world. He told me about the faraway lands he had visited when he was a young bird and could still make the journey north with the changing of the seasons. Finally, evening came, and the crow said that he had to go. The next morning he was back, however, with 2 more branches of figs. I thanked him for his generosity, and we talked another day away. That day, he even sang me a song. He didn't have a voice for singing, but I thought his song was beautiful anyway. We passed the entire fall that way, and the bird's visits became the only bright spot in my life. He brought me not only figs but cherries and walnuts too, anything small enough for him to carry. Soon, however, winter came, and with it the frosts that destroyed the figs and cherries that the crow had used to bring me. His gifts became fewer and fewer, and I could tell from his tired voice that he was flying farther and farther away to get them. One morning, when the first snows of winter had fallen, the crow asked me a question. "What would you do to leave this place?" he asked, cocking his head to the side. I thought for a moment, but I wasn't sure how to answer. Finally, I told the truth. "I would do anything to leave this place," I said. "Anything at all." The crow solemnly nodded and said, "The frost isn't the only thing that winter brings." He flapped his wings once and jumped from the windowsill, and I didn't see him for 3 days. I began to fall into a deep depression. Every morning I would still listen to the birdsong, but it sounded forlorn and empty without my friend there to listen with me. The morning after the 3rd day, my crow friend returned. It was so beautiful that day. The sun had come out from behind the clouds to melt the snow, one of the last green days before winter came in earnest. As the shadow passed over the valley in which we lived, I first mistook it for a storm cloud, but then I heard the sound. It was loud enough to crack the sky, but it wasn't thunder, it was birds. Thousands upon thousands of them descended on our house. In a whirling storm of beating wings and shrieking caws, they crashed into the walls and windows, pecking at them with wild ferocity. The house shook under their assault, and their calls were so loud that I didn't even hear the windows breaking. I must warn you now that every detail included in this account is not of my own invention, though I wish from the bottom of my heart that it was exactly that, an invention, and that none of it is at all pleasant to read. So if you have any sense, you will stop now. Forget you ever saw this, and never allow your mind to wander onto this subject again. For those of you who ignore this warning through carelessness and stupidity, you have my disrespect. For those of you who ignore this warning due to overpowering curiosity, you have my empathy, for I am just like you. But I wish now that I could return to the moment I first found that dictaphone under the floorboards of my home and stop myself from ever pressing play. But I cannot, and this is the result of that mistake. I hope that anyone who learns of the events that transpired here in my home to its previous owner, either by reading it here or otherwise, will use such information in order to prevent it from ever happening to someone else, although the madness will undoubtedly set in before long. The following is everything that I heard from the moment I pressed play. Please, please, somebody hear this. Just listen to what I have to say. I don't have much time. I can't even pick up a pen anymore. Who knows how quickly it'll take the rest of me. There's no point in telling you my name or anything about myself. It would just end up hurting my family even more, except that I used to have a sister, or I was supposed to have one, or I still do. She's sort of still here, but only inside me, like a ghost that exists only within my body. You might have heard stories about people who found teeth in their shoulders or other growths that are all that remains of the twin brother or sister they were supposed to have, the ones that never made it out of the womb, the ones that people like me absorbed before they even had a chance. It's not our fault. We don't know what we're doing. Maybe we get too close. Maybe there's something wrong with us, or maybe there's something wrong with them, and that's why we do it. Either way, my sister is still here, still inside my body, and she hates me for it. It's not her fault either. I'd probably want revenge too if I were in her position. But this, I don't think I could ever do this to anyone. Maybe she doesn't even know she's doing it. But she is, and it's unbearable. I'm meant to be turning 20 in 2 weeks, and I doubt now that I'll ever see that day arrive. A month ago, my health was near perfect. Now I'm confined to my room, and even my parents can barely look at me. And when they do, It's like all the love they ever felt for me has been depleted from their eyes, replaced with the fear and disdain that I feel for myself. I can walk, but only slowly and stiffly, and trying to eat is more than slightly difficult when your stomach has rotted away to nothing. The skin on my legs is thin and pale, but the skin on my torso, arms, and hands crumbled from existence a week ago. My heart can barely bring itself to beat. My lungs are almost enveloped in dust inside and out, and yet my face hasn't changed at all. My sister has shown me what I am to her, a monster. As I sit here now, my fingers are breaking. That's the snapping sound you can hear. They're crumbling. I'm crumbling. It won't be long now. I can't stop the recording. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you have to hear this. After that, there were screams of indescribable horror, laced with a chilling undertone of snapping and crunching. I can only imagine that the poor girl's life ended then, with the final scream, and that nothing on earth could be more torturous than the way in which she met her demise. Please, if you have read all of this, put this knowledge to good use. I will help as much as I can, but already this girl is consuming my dreams, and every night I awake to the snapping of bones, always in agony, and always with a new piece of skin missing or peeling away. Please, stop this from happening again. For context, my mom has always been a little crazy. Never drown me in the bathtub crazy, just a little off. Like sometimes she was living in a different world than the rest of us. When she looked at you, she knew in her heart that you were less real than her. I remember being really little and walking into her room to find her crying over a heap of her clothes on the ground. She had scissors in her hand and was cutting out every spot of purple she found. "I can't see it anymore, Casey," she said through her sobs. "I can't see the colors I'm supposed to see anymore." I went and hid in my room after that. When my dad came home and found me locked in my room, he asked me what was wrong. I explained what was happening with Mom, and he just sighed and went to talk to her. What I couldn't explain was that I hadn't locked the door because I was afraid of her. I had locked it because it felt like an added barrier between myself and the reality that my mother wasn't okay. When they divorced, I don't remember any particular incident that broke the camel's back. It felt more like an inevitable conclusion that we had all accepted for years by the time it happened. What I do remember is listening to my dad read off a list of the big, crazy moments from their marriage. Some of them were surprises to me, like him coming home to find her hiding in a closet with a knife. Most of them, though, I remembered all too well. So when the judge looked down at me and asked if what my father was saying was true, it was all I could do to nod back at her. Needless to say, my dad got custody of me. Even at 12, I knew that regardless of his case, there was still a chance of things not going our way. Afterwards, we went to Sullivan's and ate our weight in ice cream sundaes. I knew that it wasn't easy for him to raise me alone, but I also knew that he was doing his best. My father was a 46-year-old middleware technician when he chose to become a single parent. He worked long hours for too little pay, but still found time to tutor me in math and come to my track meets. He was patient and gentle. He's my hero. But all of that is just the lead up to my story, right? It turns out that a few months ago, my mom got in contact with my dad. She said that she was getting treatment and that she wanted to make reparations. She even gave him the number of her psychiatrist, whom my dad promptly called. The man on the other end of the line assured my dad that his ex-wife wasn't the same person from 4 years prior. He said that she had changed and that she was getting better. He promised that getting closure with my dad and me was vital to her healing. At first, my dad refused. He was convinced that no amount of medication or therapy could change the woman who had haunted him and his daughter all those years. Eventually, though, he met with her. He says that it was just to get her off his back and put the nail in the coffin. Instead, he realized that she really was acting differently, more lucid and stable. They met a few more times, and with each meeting, he became more and more convinced that she had gotten better. that this time would be different. When he walked into the house after seeing her, I couldn't tell what he was feeling. It felt like some kind of exhausted hope, the kind that shouldn't still have a pulse. An undead yearning. He needed help. I'd known that for years. He was working himself to the bone, trying to take care of both of us. When I was born, my dad had signed up to be a part of the team. Now it was just him and the growing shadows under his eyes. When he gently asked if I wanted to see my mom again, I nodded enthusiastically. Not for her or me. For him. "It is so good to see you, sweetheart." Those were the first words she said to me when she sat down across from me in the McDonald's booth. "I can't begin to apologize for everything I put you through." She looked better, I think. After all the years, my memories of the way she acted and the way it made me feel had blended together into a flat nightmare. The woman squeezing my hand wasn't so scary. It even felt appropriately motherly, though it made my skin itch. We met occasionally for months. We were alone once or twice when my dad had to step out for a work call. When we were together, she would tell me about her group therapy and all the friends she was making. She told me that it took her so long to realize that her biggest problem was self-isolating. "It drove me crazy to be alone," she said. "But it's okay now. I'm not alone anymore." Eventually, my mom asked my dad if I could stay with her overnight. He was clearly uncomfortable with the idea and told her that he would have to think it over. All I could think about were the work retreats, the trips with friends, and all the times that my dad had missed out on living his life to take care of me. For me. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, if we got to a place where my mom could take on even a little bit of my burden, he could have his life back. So I told him that I wanted to. I begged him to let me stay with her. And eventually, he agreed. "I'll be here to pick you up at 7, he said as he pulled my suitcase out of the car. He picked me up from the track and driven me straight to the cramped apartment building where my mom lived. On the dot. "And if you need me before then, promise me that you'll call." I promised him, offering a pinky when he gave me a stern look. He locked his with mine and took a deep breath. "Your mother is trying," he said. "I can appreciate that. I can even respect it. But I will drive my car through her front door if it means protecting you, understand?" I laughed at the image of his scuffed Nissan hatchback smashing through the brick and drywall. I squeezed his hand. The evening was fine to start with. Her 2-bedroom apartment was neat and tidy, if small. It had a smell, too, like the ghost of something rotten hiding in the walls. But she let me put whatever I wanted on the TV. She even brought popcorn and soda for us to eat on the couch while we watched a police procedural. When I heard the oven timer go off, I asked her what she was making as she stood up to go check on it. "Your favorite, honey," she said. "Tuna mac." I felt the heat drain from my face, just a little. Tuna mac isn't my favorite. I don't think I'd ever eaten it before that night, but I told myself to shrug it off. It had been years, hadn't it? It was all right for her to have a few misplaced memories. That alone didn't mean that anything was wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from my dad. "All good?" he asked. I responded after giving his question a thumbs up. We ate at the table as the procedural show wrapped up. I felt like we should be talking and sharing, but there wasn't much to say, really. The absence of conversation stretched between us like a tightrope we didn't dare step onto. As I scraped the last bits of tuna mac from my bowl into the trash, my mom told me that she'd picked up a movie she thought I would like. I agreed to it and sat on the couch as she put the disc in. It was a strange movie. Scary not in the way that a horror movie is scary, but in the way that a nightmare is. Everyone around you knows something that you don't. It followed a woman with amnesia, trying to understand what had happened to her. At a certain point, it got too weird for me. The strange dream logic of the movie was like a headache I couldn't shake. I pulled out my phone and started to scroll through social media, trying to do so in a way that my mom wouldn't notice. I shouldn't have worried. She was so enthralled by the movie that she was leaning expectantly forward, her eyes full of excitement and hunger. Just over halfway through, however, she suddenly grabbed my knee with an intensity that made me jump. I looked up at her to find that she was still looking just as intensely at the TV. "Watch this," she said. "This part is my favorite." I looked up at the screen to find the main characters holding each other in bed, the sexual tension escalating rapidly. I felt my cheeks flush. I know how it feels to see a sex scene with a parent in the room, but this was different. My dad always got a little uncomfortable in a way that made my discomfort feel more normal. He would usually fumble for the remote as he tried to skip through. With him, it was something to laugh about. A running joke between us. My mother's fingers digging into my skin as she commanded me to watch these two women go down on each other felt wrong. She shouldn't be touching me or encouraging me to watch. She shouldn't have that wild hunger in her eyes. I knew in my head that my mother had never been violent and had never tried to hurt me. But with her hand on my knee, I couldn't help but imagine the other holding a knife behind her back. I felt like I was going to throw up, like my throat was quickly closing. "I don't want to watch this," I finally blurted out. I don't think the words were even all the way out of my mouth before the TV flashed into darkness. The remote was already in her hand, like she had been waiting for me to say something. "Okay, honey," she said, smiling. "I've got the spare room all made up for you, but before we call it a night, I need to go feed my friend's cats. Can you come with me? I wouldn't feel right leaving you all alone." She held her hand out and beckoned to me. The hunger was gone from her eyes, leaving just that model calmness she'd had for the last few months. "How long will it take?" I asked. "I'm pretty tired." "Just a few minutes, honey. I promise." She looked so sincere that not believing her would have been like spitting in the face of God. I would be a bad, terrible daughter if I didn't trust her. Of course, I see it now. I see that a person trying to earn back your trust wouldn't act like they had never done anything wrong. A person trying to be better would make allowances for the pain their actions had caused. For her to look at me with the eyes of a mother who had never hurt or scared me should have been the first sign that she was living in a reality different from mine. But I didn't, and I couldn't see that then. So I got in the car. My stomach started churning after 15 minutes on the road. I tapped my foot on the interior carpet, feeling the silent moments in the car stretch on and on. "You said this wouldn't take long," I asked. "Eventually." "Oh, silly," she responded. "I meant that feeding the cats wouldn't take long. No, my friend lives a little bit outside of town, but we're almost there. Don't worry." She turned up the radio after that, a pop station that kept fading in and out of static. I could feel my body trying to take quicker, faster breaths, and I tried to wrestle my panic away. I tried sending my dad a quick checking-in text as we turned off the highway. My phone buzzed a moment later to tell me the text could not be sent. By the time we pulled into the snaking gravel driveway, we had been in the car for 45 minutes, and the radio was a hornet's nest of static. To call the place a house was generous. It was a cabin nestled in some deep woods on the outskirts of town, the kind where you can tell from the outside that the owner declined electricity and running water for the sake of independence. "Oh, sweetie, they are just going to love you." My mom said this as she turned the car off and dropped the keys in the cup holder. Then she got out of the car and closed the door. The cats. I asked about the still warm interior of the car. The inside of the cabin was no better than the outside. When I walked in, my mom was already holding a long-necked lighter to a lantern, casting a dim and gloomy light around the place. The rug on the hardwood floor was moth-eaten and ragged. The rotten coffee table looked like it was ready to fall over at any second. The old couch was gray and muted, and I didn't want to find out if it was from sun damage or dust. "So your friend lives here?" I asked slowly. "I have to go get the food from the shed." She called cheerily back to me, not answering my question as she stepped out the screen back door. I looked around me. No bowls for cat food, no scratching posts, not even any claw damage on the old couch. In that moment, standing in the dim light of a strange place, an unwelcome thought popped into my head. The storybook image of Hansel and Gretel being led into the woods by the father who would soon abandon them. She's not going to leave me here, I told myself. That would be crazy. The memory of her cutting the purple from her clothes was my only rebuttal. I listened closely to the silence of the night, sure that I would hear the sound of feet on gravel and the sound of the engine turning over. Instead, through the overwhelming silence, I heard a shuffle. The creak of a board, the sound of someone trying to stay still, trying not to be perceived. Did she double back? Is she going to try to scare me? Why would she do that? I jumped when the screen door slammed open, admitting my mother and the 25-pound bag of dry food she carried. "Hungry cats," I muttered. "Cats?" she asked. I saw such genuine confusion on her face that it made my eyes well up with tears. "The cats that we're here to feed," I said, my voice small. "Oh, hungry cats." She laughed. "Sorry, I misheard you. Yes, very hungry cats. Hungrier than you think." I helped her move the bag to the porch, where she flashed the screen of her phone around until she found a grimy dog food bowl tucked beneath a rotten bench. "There we are," she said. She haphazardly tore the bag open and spilled kibble into the dusty bowl. "So we can go now?" I asked. "No, sweetie," she said, turning to me with confusion on her face. "We have to wait until the cats come to eat. Don't you know anything?" "Oh, okay." My body began to shift and tighten in a way I'd consciously forgotten. The knowledge that the person in front of me was not living in the same reality as me shot through me like pain. The awareness that the wrong word could have my mother ripping my throat out with her teeth shook me. "So, what's your friend's name? What do you mean?" Her eyes were no longer on me. They were at the tree line, tracing the shadows between the trunks. "Your friend, the one who owns this house?" "Yeah, it's his house. He doesn't come by much anymore, but he told me I was free to visit whenever I wanted. I just had to feed the cats when I did." She turned to look at me, but I knew she wasn't seeing her daughter. Her eyes drifted around me like she was evaluating a statue or a cut of meat. I looked away from her instinctively. I traced the same trees with my eyes, knowing that her unrelenting stare was on me all the while. Out of the other corner of my eye, however, I caught movement. I concentrated on it without looking and realized I must be seeing the shed where the food had been. The roof caved in, like the victim of a violent crime. The door was hanging off the hinges, and there, poking out from behind the rotten mass of the shed, was a figure, a gray form against the shadowed backdrop of the woods. It loomed from the darkness with something like curiosity. "You know, we might be here a while, waiting," my mom said, eyes still on me. "Why don't you go lay down inside? I don't want you telling your father I kept you up all night." "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded 1,000 miles away. I felt like I was swimming through glass, slow and morbid. "Why don't I go lay down in the car? That way, when we leave, you won't have to wake me up." "No." Her voice was stern now, harsh. "You'll hurt your back in the car, Casey. Lay down on the couch." "But you are my daughter," she shouted, her voice ringing in the night air. "When I tell you to go to sleep, you will go to sleep, goddamn it. Do you understand?" I felt my breathing go ragged. I felt the tears fall, but I was no longer in my body. I was made of clay, which is soft and moldable, easy to smash and put away when you're done with it. My mom's arms were around me in an instant. "It's okay, honey. Mommy's here." She spoke like she hadn't been the one to shout at me, even as she led me into the abandoned cabin. "Mommy's going to make it all better. You just need to lay down now, all right?" She laid me down on the dusty couch and patted my cheek with one hand. Then she walked through the door, onto the porch, and then into the grass. "Here, kitty kitty," she began to coo. "Here, kitty kitty." I needed to get up. I needed to run. I needed to get to the car, but my limbs felt heavy and weak. All it took was having my mother yell at me for that childhood fear to fall over me like chains. As I tried to slow my breathing to regain control of my body, I heard my mother's voice grow fainter and fainter. Was she walking away from the cabin? Was she walking into the woods? That's when I noticed the other sounds. Not the shuffling from before, not the sounds of hiding. Sounds of walking, of carefully measured steps. I heard the boards creak in an uneven rhythm, like something was slow dancing all wrong. I heard the dry rasp of nails on peeling wallpaper. I heard laughter that sounded wet and dry at the same time. Something began to move against the back of the couch, and I stared with half-closed eyes at its shadow on the wall. In the outline cast by the dim little lantern, I saw something clamber onto the back of the couch. It perched there like a gargoyle, but I could see that it was massive, the size of a man, balancing precariously on a worn piece of furniture that groaned in protest. The thing above me emitted a low growl, like the rumble of a distant earthquake. I felt a heavy wetness hit my shoulder and begin to run down my limp arm. I stayed still, not by choice, not because I thought it would keep me alive. In that moment, I knew that I was dead and that I would never see my dad again. I knew that I was going to be eaten, murdered, or torn apart by whatever this drooling thing was. And since I knew that to be true, I knew that there was no point in running. There is no point in fighting. It was over. All that was left was to accept that. There you are, you nasty thing. My mom's voice cut through the tension like a flashlight through darkness. Your friends are all out here. Don't worry, you can play with her later, after she's had her nap. Through the slits of my eyelids, I watched as the shadow of the figure leaped heavily to the ground. It danced violently into view, spinning in slow, uneven circles before it came to rest on all fours at my mother's feet. It looked mostly human, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, and the knees bent at impossible angles. As it followed my mom through the door, it looked back at me. Where the eyes should have been, there were spheres of black glass. The surrounding skin was mottled and scarred in horrible twisting patterns. As it smiled, I saw that where the flat chiclets of teeth should have been, there were instead sharp splinters of bone that seemed to bleed freely. Long rivulets of bloody drool spilled out onto the hardwood. It cocked its head at me, the black glass looking into my soul. Then it leaned its head back, inhaled long and deeply, and followed my mother through the door. "Good kitty," I heard my mother say from the porch. Her voice was drowned out by the sound of dry food being shattered by sharp teeth. The back door, that was all I could think of. That rusted screen door was my only hope of escape. I slid myself off the couch as quietly as possible, my knee landing softly on the tattered rug. I stayed low to the ground and crept around the couch, stepping only on boards that looked sturdy. "She'll be so excited to meet you all, pretty girl." My mom was still cooing at the things on the porch. "And I know you'll be so happy to see her, too. I promised you more wet food, didn't I?" Once I reached the screen door, I took a deep breath. This door had been loud when my mom had opened it earlier. Looking at the rusty spring holding the door closed, I could only hope that that had been the source. As I put my hand to the spring, a sound from the porch burrowed into my shaking bones. It was somewhere between a howl and a gasp, the sound of air running over broken windpipes. A song I didn't want to hear. It spoke to a deep, ancient part of my brain. It told me to hide. Shaking worse than ever now, I pulled at the spring just enough to pop it off the screw holding it to the door. Then, my breath still, I pushed the door open and hoped for the best. It didn't make a sound. At least not over the yowling from the porch. It swung open in silent invitation to the darkness. All that panic and all that fear wouldn't let me be careful anymore. I could see the nose of the car in the carport and practically taste the dust covering the tires. I couldn't wait. My feet were quiet as I ran through the grass, but the second I stepped onto the gravel of the carport, the porch singing stopped. "Casey," my mom called. "Honey, where are you?" In moments of true panic, I've never experienced time moving any slower or faster, like people describe. For me, things just start happening all at once. In my mind, there is no delineation between the moment I pulled the door open, the moment I scrambled for the keys, or the moment I slammed the car into reverse. They all happened simultaneously, like photographs spinning in the open air. As I changed gears to drive, however, I remembered my mother standing in front of the car. The headlights played against the fabric of her dress. The dust kicked up by the car obscured her, and the half-dozen creatures flanking her on either side. And in her eyes, I saw real hurt, a genuine sense of betrayal. "What are you doing?" I saw her mouth. I didn't answer. Instead, in flagrant violation of the 3 months I had left before I could drive a car without a guardian present, I tore down the driveway and away from this madness. I took every curve inadvisably fast, feeling the inertia of the car trying to buck me every time. I drove so fast that the cloud of dust behind me quickly obscured the house from view. Good riddance. I was almost to the main road when I caught sight of the thing in the corner of my eye. It was one of the creatures, the one from inside the house, loping easily alongside my reckless driving. Its glass eyes weren't looking ahead of it, however. They were locked on me. And as it stared me down with its smile, I knew something beyond a shadow of a doubt. I had imagined that these creatures were humans, maybe deformed or mutated, but still human. And even if driven insane with pain, a human could be reasoned with and empathize with you on some level. But these weren't humans. They had never been humans, not by a long shot. In that smile, gleaming with blood, and in the contortion of muscles where eyes should have been, I knew that these were something else. This wasn't the shape of a human becoming alien, but of something alien trying to appear human. It had only gotten the details wrong after all. I exploded onto the paved road and took off in the direction I thought the highway had been, keeping an eye out for the creature. I saw it pacing along rooftops, tracking me through the flickering sodium vapor lights. By the time I hit the highway, the thing seemed to be gone, but I couldn't be sure. I think that was the point at which I realized that tears were shattering on my thighs and that I was gasping for air through sobs. So I drove, not towards home or anywhere in particular. I pushed the speed limit, trying to put as much distance between me and that awful cabin as possible. It wasn't until I felt something buzzing at my feet that I thought about stopping. In the chaos, my phone must have fallen to the floor. I grabbed at it and saw that I had a dozen texts from my dad and 20 missed calls. My tears changed then. They were no longer those of an escapee. These were the tears of someone about to be rescued. I pulled into a rest stop and called him, sniffling. I tried to explain, but before I could, he cut me off to ask where I was. I read him the address of the stop. "Tell me everything," he said. I could hear him getting into his Nissan. So I did. I told him everything. I know that in stories like mine, the teenage daughter always holds back details so she isn't thrown into a mental hospital. But I didn't even think to do that. I told my dad about the movie, about the tuna mac, and about Mom saying that she just had to go feed some cats. When I told him about seeing the first creature behind the shed, I threw up in the passenger seat. When my dad eventually got to me, I fell into his arms and sobbed, screamed, and shook there. And my father, the middle-aged professional with a bad hip, held me like I was 5 years old. "We're going to call the police," he said, running his hand through my hair. "We're going to tell them the important bits. She took you to a strange place and made you feel afraid, right? But how? I don't think we can explain those other parts, honey, but I don't think they make a difference either." I nodded. That made sense. We were halfway back home when the weight of the night settled over me, waves of tiredness washing me away from consciousness. I looked at the clock and smiled. It was 7 a.m. on the dot. I said, starting to drift away. "On the dot, kiddo." Just like I said. That was a week ago. After we talked to the police, they sent a patrol car up to the cabin for my mom. When they got there, no one was around. All they found was an empty dog food bowl with my mother's shoes neatly beside it. According to county records, the cabin had been abandoned for decades. The last owner had died before the turn of the century, and the land deed was split between his children. The police talked to all of them, but none of them had any connection to my mom. They'd assure us that they're still looking into it, but I'm not holding my breath. It doesn't matter anyway, because we're leaving. The house is already listed. My dad has been doing online interviews for a new job in a new city. He stayed home from work all week, and he called me out of school. We keep the doors locked and the windows drawn. The revolver he normally keeps in a safe is always nearby now. As soon as he can lock down a new job, he says, "We're booking our flights. We're getting away from this town and from my mom and her monsters." In the meantime, we're sleeping in the family room. I sleep on the pullout while Dad stays awake in the loveseat, watching over me. I can't wait to leave though, because sometimes, as hard as he tries, my hero falls asleep. And sometimes when he does, and I listen really close to the silence, I can hear that awful, awful singing. And every night, it's getting a little bit closer. It was already a long night. I was driving down a straight stretch of road going back home after a long night shift at work. One of the reasons I like night shift is the eerie calm of driving by yourself, with no cars passing by. As I went to turn right on the upcoming crossway, my headlights caught something. I stopped my car and looked out my window. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing baggy jeans and what looked like a green army coat. He had a bit of a beard growing on his chin. "Hey, need a ride?" I yelled at him. He turned his head toward my car and smiled, like it was the nicest thing someone offered him all day. He went around to the passenger side and got in. I didn't notice anything creepy about the guy. I mean, you hear horror stories about people picking up insane asylum patients or serial killers, but this guy had that fatherly feel about him. "Thanks. It was getting chilly out there." He said this as he smiled at me and held out his hand. "Greg Stone is at your service." I smiled back and shook Greg's hand. "John Warner." Greg lets go of my hand and looks out the driver's window. "Nice to meet you, John. Do you mind if I ask you to take me somewhere?" I guess he forgot that, which would be the reason why I let him in. "Sure. Where are you heading?" He coughed and then said, "A couple more miles down the road." I thought that seemed fair enough since my house was in that general direction. As we were driving, Greg made small talk. I learned how he was a businessman who got down on his luck and turned homeless. He had no good relationship with his family, so they didn't help him out. "That's why I always tell people to keep family members close," he says as he sighs. "We're here." I stopped the car and looked at the house we stopped at. It looked like just your normal 2-story house, except for the gnomes and flowers in the front yard. "Do you mind waiting on me for a second?" Greg asked. This isn't a drug dealer's house, is it?" I asked, because why would a homeless guy want to be in someone's house? He looked at me with a shocked face, then laughed. No, that's funny. This is just an old friend of mine's place. I just wanted to see how he was doing. This will only take a couple minutes, promise." With that, he went out of the car and up towards the driveway. I watched him knock on the door several times until it opened. I couldn't see who opened it, but Greg went inside nonetheless. As I waited, I noticed the lights that were on in the house flashing on and off several times. Then, all at once, the lights turned off. Greg opened the front door and shut it, then headed straight to my car. As he got in, I asked, "So what happened?" Greg turned with a serious face and said, "That's personal, nothing else." I just shut my mouth and started up the road. "Mind if I ask you to take me back to where you found me?" I was going to cry because Greg was already starting to creep me out. I didn't say it to him, so I just drove along to end our friendship on friendly terms. As we go back to the crossroads, Greg starts to get out of the vehicle. As he gets out, he shuts the door and then looks at me through the open passenger window. "Since you were nice to me, John, I'll let you ask me one question." One question. I thought in my head, confused by what he meant. Only one thing bothered me. What happened at that person's house with the lights? What happened up there at that house? I asked him. He sighed as if I had asked him something he didn't want to say. That person you dropped me off at made a deal with me. He broke that deal, so I took care of him. Took care of him. So, you killed him? I asked, trying to stay calm. Yes. Suddenly, it seemed as if his entire body was shaking. Suddenly I was seeing a mix of Greg and a horrifying creature with horns all around its body. What are you? I'm something not from this material plane, John. Now that you've seen my form, you've made a deal with me yourself. The next time someone picks me up, I'll be coming for you like you did to that other. My heart was beating really fast. Sweat was pouring down my brows. I can't wait till we meet again. Suddenly, the creature was gone. I quickly sped out of there as fast as I could. So now I'm here to ask for your help on how to deal with this creature. And if you can, please don't pick up any hitchhikers if you value my life. I breathed deeply, pulling the warm Georgia air into my lungs. Concentrate, son. Feel the energy building in your core. That's your reserve. That's the energy you'll push into your spell work. This will empower your rooms, fill your barriers, and defend you from things that would do you harm. I felt something, but it was hard to explain. The fibers were there, the fledgling tendrils of whatever Grandpa was talking about. But it was like seeing something hidden only to have it slip away when I tried to grasp it. I'd reach for it and find it again, but whenever I tried to exert any kind of control over it, the energy would move away from me. Don't be so rough, boy. Let it come to you. You can't manhandle it. You've got to let it come through on its own. I sighed, opening my eyes as sweat stood out on my forehead. I'm trying, but that's like saying, don't think about it. After giving me something to think about, we were sitting in a cleared area near the vegetable patch, our legs Indian style beneath us. Grandpa had been teaching me runes and sigils for about a year, but this was the first time we had worked with the concept of empowering them. Grandpa said it was essential if you wanted them to be more than squiggles, and I was trying my hardest to make them work. Trying but ultimately failing. Grandpa, however, didn't seem perturbed. It's not easy. I struggled with it myself for a while. And I was a lot younger than you. I sat back against the wall of the shed, listening to the crickets as they began to tune up in the early evening. Soon the mosquitoes would be out, and we'd have to retreat to the porch if we wanted to enjoy the sunset. They had been exceptionally bad this year, with the heat really not helping, and Grandpa and I were hoping for a good freeze this year so they wouldn't be so bad next year. Grandma, teach you this? I asked, wondering if Grandpa had taught Mom any of this. She did. Well, she taught me some of it. The runes, the sigils, that was all Grandma. She taught me how to empower them, but the rest came from Nat. Ah, I said, peeking from one eye. The mysterious Nat. How come I'm just hearing about him anyway? Grandpa smiled into the sunset, saying, it wasn't time yet. We weren't quite there yet in the story, kiddo. We sat in the gathering twilight, waiting for speakers, as we enjoyed the gradual cooling of the stiflingly hot July day. This reminds me of the times I spent learning from him, actually. I was a bit impatient too, and Nat was always smiling at me, like one day I would know what it was all about. I imagine you might know a little something about that, too. I smiled, having some inkling of what he was talking about. I remember the early days when we were just starting out. I was sure I knew it all. Sure I knew enough to get by, but Nat would show me how little I knew. I just sat there, knowing it would begin soon. Grandpa didn't need much prompting when it was time for a story, and as we sat watching the day die, it was as good a time as any for a tale. I waved my hand at the first of the mosquitoes, too comfortable with the soil beneath me for a change of venue. It all started 2 mornings after the incident in the woods. That was the day that he arrived on John's doorstep before first light. John woke me up just as the first fingers of light crept up the horizon. I came awake slowly, opening my eyes like I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. "You've got a visitor," he said, his eyes filled with old mischief. "Who is it?" I asked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Come find out," he said. "There's coffee in the kitchen." I came into the kitchen about 10 minutes later to find the old man from the woods sitting with John and drinking coffee. He was dressed in fur, his hair long and gray, and when he saw me, his eyes twinkled with mischief. He smiled gummily at me as I came in, and the contrast between his baby pink gums and his nut-brown skin was jarring. "You?" I said, not sure what was going on. "What are you doing here?" "I came by to see if you'd be interested in learning something a little different from your mountain ways." "How did you know I was from the mountains?" I asked, looking at John mistrustfully. The old man laughed and said, "He didn't have to tell me anything, boy. I can sense the old magic in you. It's in your walk, in your speech, and in the way you tried to fight off the influence of the music the other night. You have talent, but it's raw and untrained. Someone never finished your instruction, and I'd like to fix that." I started to say something I would likely regret, but John must have read it on my face. "My uncle doesn't offer to teach often, and he never offers twice. Think very carefully before you throw the offer away because you haven't had a cup of coffee and a moment to think about it." I started to flare at him too, but instead, I took that coffee and had a minute to consider it as I let the warm morning glory wash through me. It was a heck of an offer. Grandma had never taken a student besides me, and I felt like that might be common. The times were changing. Technology was beginning to rear its head, and most people didn't care about the old ways. This may be one of the last old-timers willing to pass on the secrets he has guarded over the years, and I'd be a fool not to take him up on it. "So, how about it, boy?" the old man asked. "Yeah," I said after a few seconds of thinking. "I didn't have anything else to do today." He nodded. "Call me Nat, and I think you'll need more than an afternoon for what I'm going to teach you." We headed out into the woods before the sun was more than an annoying suggestion. Feel the world awakening, boy. A new day is beginning, and you are not the only one to know it. As we walked through the forest, I felt a chill that had absolutely nothing to do with any nip in the air. It was summer, and the days were at their least temperamental, but I was not at ease in these woods. I had nearly lost my life here more than once, and I was going in with someone who was a total stranger. Well, not a total stranger, I suppose. He had saved me and kept me from death, and now he wanted to train me. I guess I just wanted to know why. "Do you have such awakenings in Appalachia?" he asked. I blinked. "How do you know about Appalachia?" The old man chuckled lightly and asked, "How much experience do you have with the spirit world?" We stopped then, the old man taking a seat on a fallen log, and he invited me to join him. "Little," I told him, "my grandmother always said that spirits of the dead were best left at peace, so long as they didn't bedevil the living." He turned to look at the rising sun, seeming lost in the brightening sky, before telling me a story of his own. 2 nights ago, while I was asleep in my bed, someone came to me who was not of my tribe. I have been the spiritual leader of this tribe for a long time, but this is the first time I haven't been approached by a spirit from my own land. The woman awoke me and told me I had to go right now, that her grandson was in great danger, and that I was the only one who could save him. So of course, I went right away to help you. I looked at him in disbelief and said, "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that your grandmother asked me to finish your instructions that night as well as save your life." Nat said gummily, "So I suppose we should begin." He slid to the ground, his bony knees poking from beneath his hide, and instructed me to do the same. I followed numbly, suddenly more willing to go along with the old man's teachings. The sun rises, a new day begins, and the energy in you is new as well. You can feel it in your stomach, a delicate chord of intentions and potential. Take hold of it, master it, and you can use it as a tool. "Use it?" I asked. "Use it," he reiterated. "Can you feel it?" "Just here," he said, putting a hand on my stomach. I could feel something there, like a ball of twine, and as the sun's rays hit my face, it seemed to come alive with errant heat. You feel it. Now you must learn to direct it. We sat there till the sun was nearly over top of us, and I dare say I felt about the same as you when we rose to make our way home. How was my grandmother? I asked him, not sure of what I meant. She is at peace, he said, though hers is a spirit that seems unwilling to rest. She was a great woman, and you have not fallen far from her shadow. I smiled then, glad to hear she was doing well. You said we could use the power there. What did you mean? He chewed the question over, thinking of the best way to answer it. When you form your runes, you use this to empower them. Yes. I nodded, feeling that I understood. Turning to the trees that surrounded us, he lifted his staff and spun. The boughs shook, and the birds took flight. Ever since I was a boy, I have found myself disgusted by shrimp. Not just shrimp, but any crustacean in general, save crabs. This didn't start until, at a Chinese restaurant, I, for the first time, encountered a shrimp with both its legs and eyes still attached. It was a strange feeling realizing I hadn't been eating just some small part of the creatures before, but the entirety of them. I remember the feeling of looking into the vat of unpeeled shrimp, their cold, unfeeling eyes staring back at me. Of course, there was a second inciting incident, this one putting me off lobster. While I sat and ate a lobster in my home, my older sister came up to me and said, "You realize those are basically giant cockroaches, right? They're basically cousins." And as I thought about this, I could no longer bring myself to eat. Not because what she said was simply disingenuous, but because the closer I looked at the lobster, the more I saw the similarities. Long antennae, a segmented body, and worst of all, the legs. The small legs on the lobster looked so similar to those I had seen on cockroaches in the past. Of course, as the years have gone by, I haven't let this repulsion prevent me from partaking in the occasional lobster roll or shrimp dish. This story really begins when I decided to take a gamble in a related sense by trying a seafood stew at a restaurant I had never been to before. I received an email on August 3rd. The email had not been filtered by my junk folder, so I opened it up. It was from a new restaurant opening pretty close to me. The name of the restaurant, Taste of China, continued a naming trend I had seen in Chinese restaurants near me, of which there were many, in part due to my living close to a historically Chinese area. The body of the message was about a soft launch taking place a week from when the email arrived. It said it was a somewhat exclusive event, which struck me as odd, as it didn't seem the type of place to be hosting something like that, but more so because I didn't realize why I had gotten an invitation. Of course, I occasionally reviewed restaurants on Yelp and ate at any new place that opened around me, as well as several older ones, but it still didn't explain why they chose me or how they got my email. Still, the pictures they had sent as attachments looked downright amazing, which was not the norm for this type of establishment. I decided to go. When I got there, the first thing that struck me was how unlike other Chinese restaurants it was. The decor was dark and modern, something I saw more often in Japanese or fusion fare, where many Chinese restaurants had large tables and were in big open spaces. This one seemed to be narrow, with the aisles next to the booths hardly large enough to allow passage. Also, the booths were an unusual choice and were a bit small and cramped. I thought I'd leave this as feedback, maybe asking them to scoot the booths back a foot or two or even considering some tables. Anyway, the menu was a little weird too. Where I was used to a litany of different items and meats, this place had only 2 sections. Appetizers, with 3 choices, and entrees, with an additional 3 choices. At the time, I assumed it was just because of the soft launch, but now I realize how finished the menu seemed. Anyway, of the choices, the one that seemed the best to me was one called Seafood Stew. This had been shown on the website and looked delicious. a beautiful dark red dish with tempting pieces of white flesh poking out of the liquid. I ordered this along with 2 appetizers and a drink. I think dumplings and a bun, though I can't remember exactly. The stew came out of a large pot, still boiling. To say the stew was phenomenal would be an understatement. The shrimp and lobster were good, but whatever fish they added was amazing. Even as an avid connoisseur of food and someone who has tried many dishes, this one was a cut above the rest. It exceeded even the 2 Michelin-starred restaurants I had visited. It was the crown of my restaurant visiting experience. The flavor was savory in a way I hadn't known seafood had to be, and the sauce was excellent as well. But the thing that kept me eating was that fish's white meat, which had a flavor unlike anything else I had ever eaten. The only thing I disliked were the shells. Either some of the shrimp or lobster shells had been added to the stew, and their appearance was off-putting. They had a dark color I had never seen in a shrimp or lobster before, and they also had long, twisting spines. Still, even with this small caveat, it remained the best meal I had ever eaten, bar none. When I finished up and paid the check, I got up to head to the bathroom. I asked the waiter where it was, and he told me it was the door on the right at the end of the hall. I passed through the narrow corridors, which seemed to be slightly too long, going further than I thought possible. When I reached what I assumed was the bathroom, I entered. I realized my mistake now. I thought he had said, "The door is right at the end of the hall." What greeted me was a sight I'll never forget. First, I saw the tub. The wall was lined with similar tubs, but this one sat open, near a counter. It was full of water, but still, underneath something could be made out. The wriggling of a large mass of creatures kept me transfixed for a moment before I remembered that some restaurants do use live ingredients. Then I saw a middle-aged man with almost white skin reach in and pull one of the creatures out. As he pulled it out, I saw his black, chitinous body shining in the light. He continued to pull, and it continued to come out, its segmented body now visible to me. The thing was some type of centipede. It had hundreds of long, multi-segmented legs, all wriggling in the air as the man pressed its head on the cutting board, eliciting a strange, high-pitched shriek, and then brought his cleaver down with a sickening crunch, cutting the screech off entirely. The legs continued to wiggle for a moment before falling still. The man pulled the rest of its body out of the tub. What I assumed was a mass of wriggling creatures had, in reality, been one long organism. The thing had to have been 20 feet long, given the way its body kept coming out, as he pulled more and more out. Next to him, I saw the same pot and dark broth I had been served for dinner. As I felt the dish I had eaten for dinner rising in my throat, I turned quickly and ran to the door across the hall, this time correctly finding the unlabeled bathroom. I emptied the contents of my stomach into the toilet, disgusted and scared by what I had seen. I went home after that. After paying my bill, I asked the waiter what the seafood stew had been made of. He gave me a puzzled look before replying, "Shrimp, lobster, and fish." The same thing it had said on the menu. When I got home, I started researching. There was such a thing as an aquatic centipede, but nothing so long or with legs as long as the one I had seen. A month later, I drove by the storefront, hoping to catch a glimpse of that pale man who had been working in the back. But when I drove by, all I saw was an empty storefront, the sign and furniture all removed. Jen yanked the curtains closed, feeling exposed. She ran through the house, checking the locks again and roughly pulling all the curtains close. She reached the glass door in the kitchen and came face to face with her neighbor Todd, screaming loudly enough to make him jump. Todd frowned, breathing heavily, and shook his head. "Jesus, Jen, what is it? What happened?" Jen cracked the door open with the chain lock still in place. "Sorry, Todd. She suddenly remembered that he was supposed to be out of town. "Wait, why are you here? And why are you in town?" Todd looked slightly offended. Well, Chrissy and I got into a big argument over how her dad always treats me, and while it was pretty rough, I am being spared a trip to see the in-laws. But yeah, I got home like 10 minutes ago and saw Officer Daly leaving, so I figured I'd come check in on you and see if everything was okay. Oh yeah, it's just, well, the kids, we were playing hide and go seek and I couldn't find them. And then, something shiny glinting by Todd's side caught her eye. He gripped a pair of shears in his left hand. Todd followed her eyes down to see what had stopped her so abruptly. Wha? Oh, sorry, yeah, when I was crossing the backyard to get to yours, a lot of brush was getting in my way, so I thought I'd just get on it, and get it out of the way. And you don't have to talk to me through the door. Todd smiled, taking a step forward. Jen didn't flinch. Her mind was racing. The phone line was down. Todd had appeared out of nowhere. The shears, the phone, the kids, the shears. Jen slammed the door in Todd's face and locked the other two bolts. Hey, Todd shouted and banged on the door with his fist holding the shears. I just want to talk, he shouted, still banging the door. Jen ran upstairs and tore through her father's old chest, desperately clawing around for the old 9mm. Why would Todd want her children? Was he trying to leave her alone? His wife was out of town, and he was always flirting just a bit too much. She found the gun just as she heard glass shattering downstairs. She silently loaded and cocked it. As much as instinct told her to hide, she couldn't, not with Jordan and Casey's lives at stake. She crouched down, surveying the first floor from the top step. The kitchen door was completely obliterated, and Todd lay sprawled out on his chest. It had to be Jeremy. He took the kids, and now he was back to take her. This can't be happening, she repeated in her head over and over. She cracked. She couldn't take the tension any longer. What do you want from us? She screeched down the stairs. Jen? She heard John shout back. Oh God! She cried out as she raced down the stairs. John stood in the living room, facing the kitchen, with his pistol drawn. She threw her left arm around him, keeping the gun out of sight. She wasn't entirely sure if it was legal for her to have the weapon. Todd was here. He's not supposed to be. And he had these big shears, and I freaked out. She wailed into his shoulder. I think Jeremy was here. There's blood everywhere. Don't worry. I showed up just as Todd broke the glass to get in through your kitchen door. I shot him. It wasn't Jeremy, he said, stroking her hair. But I didn't hear any gunshots, Jen said, confused, thinking surely Todd had been stabbed. Silencer, said John. I didn't want to shake up the whole neighborhood if I didn't have to. Oh, right. Jen exhaled. Are my children at his house? Did you find them? Was Todd even involved in that, or does he just have amazing timing? Is he going to be okay? Shh, shh, John said, holding her tighter. You don't have to worry about John, Jeremy, or any other man ever again. I'll make sure of it. Now, how about some dinner? Jen pulled away, frowning, saying, John, I can't exactly eat right now. My children are missing, she began, tearing up. John continued smiling. How about I go with you, and we look for them together? Help the other guys you said are looking. Jen offered. Let them do their job, sweetie. They don't need any help. These are professional police officers. We're going to find little Jordan and Casey. Jen stopped moving, trying to remember when she told him the names of her children. They went to the same high school together, but that was all. He didn't know anything about her children. In fact, he hadn't even asked for their descriptions to tell the dispatchers who to look for. We'll get a big cheesy pizza, he continued, 2 flavors of ice cream. And hey, maybe we'll even rent a movie to get your mind off of things. Her heart dropped, her stomach flew into her throat, and her breathing grew short and shallow. John, how do the dispatchers know who to look for? Jen asked slowly. I told them what they looked like, Jenny. You really need to calm down, John said with a new note of seriousness in his voice. John, how do you know what my children look like? Jen asked, gripping the gun still hidden behind her back. John's smile faded, and he took a step closer, his fists clenching. That's really not important, Jenny. Don't you want your children to be found? Don't you want them to be safe? Don't you want your children back, Jenny? Why do you keep calling me Jenny? You ask a lot of questions, John shouted, making Jen jump. That is what you liked to be called in high school, wasn't it? When did we still hang out? Before you met that freak, Jeremy, and cut me out of your life completely. John, where are my kids? Jen shouted back. Jeremy's children are none of your concern anymore, John roared. Jen pulled the gun from behind her back and pointed it at John, shaking, praying she loaded it correctly. Todd didn't break the glass door, did he? Jen asked softly. Did he? She shouted. He was just another man that wanted to get to you, John slurred lazily, unfazed by the gun, as he plopped down on the couch. You know, if you shoot me, you'll never find them. Jen felt her will slip as she sobbed. What do you want? She whimpered. Sit, John ordered, and give me the gun. Jen did as she was told and collapsed into the armchair. Did you even notice how much I cared about you in high school? I never stopped caring. I've been watching you and keeping you safe for years, Jen. John spat. John continued his diatribe, relaying stories from high school that Jen barely remembered. As he ranted, she noticed a light out of the corner of her eye. It was Chrissy. She was home from her parents' place. Please come here looking for Todd, Jen thought to herself. Please, please, please. Jen kept her eyes focused on Todd as she noticed Chrissy crossing her backyard in her peripheral. I can keep you safe. No one will ever touch you again. Think of Casey. Think of little Jordan. I'll keep them quiet. John and Jen jumped as Chrissy's screams interrupted them. She'd found Todd. Jen seized the moment to snatch back the gun. John lunged for it, setting it off. His face froze, and his eyelids drooped. He'd taken a bullet straight to the gut. John staggered backward, crashing to the floor. Jen ran to Chrissy, who held Todd in her arms. He drifted in and out of consciousness. There's no time to explain. Please, I need to use your phone, Jen begged. She helped Chrissy drag Todd to the front yard, just as two officers screeched to a halt in their patrol cars. 4 officers with guns drawn rushed toward the house, yelling for Jen and Chrissy to lay down. Apparently, neighbors contacted police at the sound of the gunshot. The officers didn't immediately comprehend why one of their own was lying on Jen's floor after her children went missing. However, after hearing knocking coming from John's patrol vehicle, they found Jordan and Casey unharmed in the trunk. John survived but was fired and sent to a psychiatric ward for counseling. 58, 59, 60. Hide and go seek was the order of the evening. 2 days of rain with no signs of stopping meant mud, mud, and more mud. Jen already knew where the kids were. They always hid together in the same spot. Twins like to stick together, it seemed. Where could they be? She said convincingly as they giggled somewhere in the house. She tiptoed down the hall and peeked into their room. Goodness, I will never find them. Maybe here, she shouted as she dropped to the floor and pulled the covers back. Air, guess not, she murmured, searching the empty space under the bed. How about here? She shouted again, this time at an empty closet. They're really making me work for it this time, she thought. Nothing in the bath, no one in the laundry. She knew they were too scared to venture in the basement, but decided to check after she'd exhausted all other options. Jen noisily stamped down the stairs to announce her presence, hoping to elicit some giggles and shuffling. I'm going to find you, she sang. She stopped, noting the uncanny silence. With a 5-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, the only silence she ever experienced happened while they were sleeping, and even that was often interrupted by nightmares. Jordan, Casey, come on, kids, you win. I give up, she shouted merrily. Ollie, ollie, oxen free. You win, she shouted with slightly more urgency. Mommy's not playing anymore. Come on now. It's time for dinner. Still nothing. All right. How about this? If you come out now, we'll get a big cheesy pizza, 2 buckets of whatever flavor ice cream you want, and we'll rent a movie. But you have to come out now. A minute passed, and panic set in. All right, kids, come out now. If you don't come out, you're going to be in trouble, okay? She shouted in her serious voice. Jordan Oliver Jones, you and your sister come out this instant. Jen suddenly heard movement above her and sprinted up the stairs. What on earth took you so long? She fussed as she reached ground level. I was starting to get worried. Jen froze. The front door was wide open. She knew she'd locked it. She was obsessive about locking the door and checked it at least twice a day. She ran out onto the porch, dizzy and nearly hyperventilating. Jordan. Casey. She ran inside and called the police. Jen wasn't thinking clearly. Yes, I need help. My children are missing. Cherry Street, 43 Cherry Street. I was playing hide and go seek with them, and I couldn't find them. I searched everywhere, and then I found the door open, and they're not here. They're gone, she shrieked, the panic building. Is there anyone who might want to take them? Could they be with their father? A relative? The neighbors? Asked a calm voice on the other end of the phone. My family doesn't live near here, and the neighbors are out. And Jen's stomach knotted up. Oh God, their father. I have a restraining order against him. He shouldn't even. He's not supposed to be in town or anywhere near or. Ma'am, I want you to go inside and lock the doors, just to be safe. Make sure all windows are latched as well. I'm sending a dispatch unit to patrol the area. Can you do that for me? The operator asked in a soothing voice. Yes, I'm inside, Jen panted. Good. Thank you. Can you tell me about their father? The officer asked. Jen shuddered as the memories flooded back. He murdered his ex-wife in our home. It was all over the news. Jeremy Picking. He. Oh, yes, I remember. The officer interrupted. Shouldn't he be? Jen waited for her to finish and heard silence. Hello? Are you there? Jen tried another number, and there was no dial tone. She jumped hard at the sound of a loud knock at the door. She saw what looked like an officer's uniform through the frosted glass and rushed to unlock it. Are you okay, Jen? It was Officer John Daly, an old friend of Jen's from high school and a police officer in town for over a decade. Gosh, you got here fast. Jen sighed, relieved to not be alone anymore. The kids, John. They're gone. Don't worry, Jen, John interjected, holding her shoulders as she started to weep again. They're probably just running around the neighborhood, messing around. I've got 2 cars out patrolling right now. Just stay inside and try to keep a cool head. We'll find him. Jen locked the door behind her again and paced the floor, wringing her hands, peering out the window, and rechecking every potential hiding spot. As she crawled out from under the dining room table, she suddenly noticed motion on the second floor of the house next door. Her breathing stopped. They were supposed to be away for the weekend. A light in the attic flicked on, and the curtains swayed. Jen walked right up to her window, close enough for her nose to touch the glass, when the light suddenly flickered off again.